is kind of deep into the novel, almost at the end, so I'm going to give you just a little bit of background. My novel is about a female photojournalist in Vietnam. She's been serving there for a while, and she's starting to realize what the war is really about and that she needs to leave now. The love of her life has been killed, and so she's decided that she needs to go home because she's starting to get obsessed with the idea of capturing pictures and getting caught up in the war. So her assistant at the time, Glen, who's a Vietnamese assistant, asked her a long time ago when she first came to Vietnam, what would you like to capture? What is the picture that would do it for you as a photojournalist? And she says, well, I want to photograph the Ho Chi Minh Trail and the North Vietnamese. A lot of photojournalists wanted to do that because that was the most elusive thing. That was the holy grail, because if you got that picture, you were famous. So he's going to take her out and take her there to get her picture before she leaves. After 3 days, Helen no longer thought of the crooked apartment or Saigon. Even Darrow changed from a pain outside, inflicted, to something inside, a tumor, with only its promise of future suffering. The fastness of the jungle struck her again in all its extraordinary voluptuousness, its wanton excess. It enchanted. Time rolled in long green distances, and she took comfort in the fact the land would outlast them, would outlast the war, would outlast time itself. They traveled straight for 3 days, illegally crossing the border of Cambodia at some point, and continued on. They moved beyond rules. She, in her grief, was also beyond rules. Gradually, as happened each time, Helen was absorbed by the details of the patrol, the heat, the terrain, the soldiers, till nothing else existed. She was impressed by the obvious relish with which they went about their job, hardwired for it in a way other units were not. They lived deep in the land, traveled through it like ghosts. No base camps or supply drops. Understood there would be no mercy if they were caught. They made do with very little, whatever was on their backs or taken from the land. Deep in the wilderness, Helen experienced the long force slipping beneath the surface, losing the sense of herself as separate from her surroundings. After 5 days, all thought of the war was gone. Only movement and land covered, the safety of the men and herself. She lost her tiredness, lost her appetite, simply ate and slept enough to have the strength to keep walking. The idea of taking photos small and beside the point. The Lerps mostly ignored her, except for the one who had made the body bag comment. After a week, he came up to her and complimented her. You're almost invisible. On the 10th day, they received a click hiss on the radio, a signal an NVA convoy would be passing within hours. They'd have set up positions in the bush with a clear view of a wide dirt path that crossed a quick-moving river. The sound of the water concealed them against accidental noise. Lynn and Helen cut branches to create a tripod inside a large bush, then hid the camera and zoom lens with leaves. Lynn attached a cable release for the shutter. When they come, no movement, no framing. We have to be lucky. If your hands shake, no problem. She listened and did what Lynn told her without question, enacting a ritual to summon a spirit, conjuring an enemy that had for the most part remained invisible and otherworldly. Beyond belief that such a force could be made up of individual people. And she wondered if it was the same for the North Vietnamese. Did they fear the magic of the Americans with their planes and bombs, their endless machines? Each time the Americans came across fresh footprints of rubber sandals, they stared at them with a kind of queasy awe. The only tangible evidence of the enemy's existence so far were dead bodies. But strangely, the dead were somehow less, did not match the fear and terror they inspired, much like one could not imagine flight from the evidence of a dead bird on the ground. Hours passed that held the weight of days. 10 feet away, Helen heard the click hiss of the radio again as the Lerp nodded up and down the line, then shut it off. More hours, with only a minimum of movement. The day overcast and cooler, a thin fog curled at the top of the mountains, and the first enemy soldier materialized on the path without a sound. How young they seemed. barely out of boyhood in their shabby khaki uniforms, thin so that their pants rolled up revealed the large knobs of knees. The AKs strapped across their chests looked too big for them to handle, children playing war with their father's guns. Their faces so serious, and yet they moved with the energy of teenagers, confident in their steps. When the first soldiers came to the river, they stopped and scanned it up and down, but they were at the narrowest and slowest moving part. Lerps made sure of that before they set up positions, and Helen pressed down on the cable release over and over, hoping that just by sheer numbers she would come up with a usable frame. The click of the camera inaudible over the gravelly sound of the running water. The first soldiers waded in their rubber sandals halfway across the river, the rushing water reaching waist high so that they had to raise their weapons. Beyond the point guards, soldiers came with heavy loads strapped onto bicycles, a bamboo pole across the handlebar, another on the seat for steering. One of them said something to a soldier in the stream, and the young man again scanned the river up and down and shrugged. The bicycles shuddered in the river, the rushing water tugging against the canvas bags, forcing the drivers to cross quickly, almost at a jog, because the power of the current would tire them, soaking the bags heavy and making their jobs harder. More than 50 bicycles passed in an hour. Next came a kind of crude wagon balanced on 4 flat rubber tires. 2 soldiers directed it, one front, one back. Halfway across the river, a front tire caught on something underwater, and the force of the soldier pushing from the back made it go in deeper, splaying the wagon sideways so it was a 45-degree angle to the bank. The 2 soldiers tried to straighten it, then back it up, but the vehicle wouldn't budge. Now the soldiers closest to the Americans stopped on their side of the riverbank, laid their bikes down and slipped off their packs, waded into the water to free the wagon. It took 8 men to get it moving, and when they reached the other side, the steep bank was too slippery and the wheels couldn't gain traction. An order was given to cut poles down to create a ramp. 5 soldiers, including one young boy, took out small hatchets shaped like half-moons and began combing through the surrounding brush. 4 of them moved upstream away from the Americans, but the young boy moved downstream, straight toward them. Helen held her breath and moved her hand in time to see one of the Lerps nearest her pull the pin out of a grenade, and then the boy soldier was near them, but he was not looking for a pole. He seemed glad to stop marching, and he looked up at the sky and down at the stream, and he reached in his pocket, pulling out something white that he quickly stuck in his mouth. And as he began to chew, Helen realized that it was gum, and the surprise made her smile. An order was barked from one of the soldiers holding the wagon in the stream, and the boy soldier veered directly toward Helen and Lynn, seeing the easy lure of their cut branches. He reached for one of the poles holding the camera, bringing his right hand with the hatchet up. When the pole came away in his hand, he found himself looking eye to eye with Lynn. The boy soldier's eyes grew big, and his chest inhaled a yell when his vision caught the movement of Helen's hand on the cable, and his eyes grew larger. Helen looked at him and knew that it was probably the end for all of them. But something in his face and gestures made her unafraid. Gently, she raised her hand and ran her index finger lightly across her neck. More a statement of their situation they all found themselves in than a threat. And the boy soldier exhaled without a sound, stepped back, his eyes traveling again to Lynn, who raised his own hand to cover his face, palm down, slowly dragging his hand down his features, fingertips finally grazing his chin, a mind to erase all that had been seen. And the soldier quickly turned at the new barked orders from the men soldiers down in the stream, and again he looked at the water, squinting as the sun reflected off it, motionless for a moment, before he moved away, blowing a big sugary bubble behind. Poles were cut and put under the wagon, and it tracked up the muddy bank. The last of the soldiers, including the boy, crossed it, and then the clearing was empty, only footprints proving the whole thing had not been a dream. Thank you.